I do think in every heart there is an aspiration for happiness, almost an expectation, in spite of how horrible life can be. So when you have the message of Christ, that taps into your normal aspiration. Oh, I can become a child of God. I can go to heaven. I can have a good life. Not a life of success necessarily, but I can take joy in goodness. And that's liberating for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's finally where I can be happy.
Here we go. Welcome to The Way is Love on the Focusing Way podcast. I'm your host, David Battistella. Find The Focusing Way on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. To access bonus content and extras, subscribe at thefocusingway.com. Christmas Blossoms is an illustrated book written by Priscilla Smith McCaffrey, and it warms my heart. As we approach the Advent season, we may be pulling out our Advent calendar or preparing our Christmas decorations, readying our homes for the wonderful season which annually comes upon us. It's a time to prepare for the celebration of the arrival of Jesus and to remember Him in His humility, poverty, and innocence. He came to us as a child to conquer our hearts with His love. Year upon year, despite the distractions and all of the other reasons to renounce this season, the story of Jesus as the Christ child can only serve to deepen our faith, hope, and charity. Christmas Blossoms is a thoughtful, heartfelt, and delicate book, which tells the story of factory worker Jian, a painter, artisan, and pre-Mao Chinese Christian, who lost everything, but placed his faith and love in the child Jesus in the form of a small figure he had created and kept secret in his pocket. It's a difficult story at times, one of broken hearts and broken lives, but uplifting too, recounting the friendship of Christ and also the kinship and love that can be exchanged between people. It's also a story of Christmas miracles. It had me weepy a couple of times, and the volume is beautifully illustrated with its watercolor and sketches. The illustration was crafted by sacred art painter Gwyneth Thompson Briggs. Here to reveal more about Christmas Blossoms is Priscilla Smith McCaffrey. And joining me now is the author of Christmas Blossoms, Priscilla Smith McCaffrey. Priscilla, thank you so much for being with us today.
David, thank you for having me. This is a pleasure.
I really first want to congratulate you on this volume and on writing what I'm already considering a timeless and important Christmas story.
Thank you.
It really is. And I'd like to know how this idea for Christmas Blossoms was born.
Well, there were a couple of contributing factors. Years ago, I gave my daughter a Christmas ornament, and it had horses painted on it. And then I realized, they're painted inside the ornament. So, and there were, and I could see that there was no way that it could have been done except through the top, the very minuscule top of the ornament. So it was a glass bubble, and it was a lovely picture. And so I always wondered, who does this kind of thing? And it has always struck me as ironic that so much of our Christmas stuff comes from communist China. And so I was thinking, I didn't know exactly where that ornament came from, but I thought, is this some craftsman's work over there? And is he appreciated? Does he or she know how beautiful this is and how much joy it will bring to my daughter every year when she takes it out? And she still has it, and I love seeing it. And but also I have always wondered about what the Chinese worker in the factory must think about our Christmas? How much do they know about the religious aspects of it? And how much are they piecing together themselves with all the very different things that go into our holiday celebration? And I suppose they know it's partly religious and partly secular, but there's Rudolph in the manger and the Blessed Mother, the Holy Family, the shepherds, the kings, straw, Santa Claus gifts, Christmas trees, all these things. And how do they make sense of our holiday? And I've also / holy day. And I've also thought, I hope they continue to be supplying us until they get the answer. And actually, what's interesting is they do celebrate Christmas. For them, it's just a secular holiday. It's a nod to the West, and they know that this is a big deal to the West. Maybe the way some Americans will celebrate Chinese New Year just for the heck of it, just for fun. So they do a little bit of it. They use their own decorations, and some will have Christmas trees. And one of my friends said he went to a hotel in China over Christmas holidays, and the decoration was spectacular. It was over the top. It probably would have been too much for us, but I still like that. I'm glad that they're balancing this thing, and maybe someday they're going to say, "What is this all about?" The incarnation. That's a big word.
Yeah.
What is that? What has that got to do with us?
Yeah. Well, throughout your story, we sort of learn about the irony about a time in China when Christian worship was forbidden, but still it was gladly exporting Christmas products to the world, which we were buying up. But you do this in a way of not being political, but telling it through this delicate life of your main character. Can you tell me about him?
Dear Jian, and I'll just call him Jian. He was born, of course, he's a fictitious character, but he was born in 1940. So that would have been 9 years before the Communist Revolution. And I have him born into a Catholic family. And there were several 100,000 Catholics at the time. And I think now Cardinal Zen says there are 12 million Catholics. Of course, they can't all make themselves known. But anyway, the revolution came, and he was separated from his family and from the priests, and had to survive however he could. And yet he always carried with him a little replica of the Christ child from the family creche. And it always gave him a sense of security, and it connected him to his family. And whenever he thought of his family, he thought of Christmas Eve, because as children do, they love Christmas time. They have so many images and so that they carry with them. And even if it only happened a few times, a child thinks, oh, that's the way it was. That's what we always did. Maybe it was just 2 or 3 times that he could have remembered. But anyway, that's just the gift of Christmas. Our Lord, he gave us this Christmas celebration. And we have made, of course, a great deal of it. And some of it we haven't been very successful with. But anyway, it imprints an image in a child's heart. And so he has this image of love and security and the church and festal celebration. And even though he can't practice his faith much of the time, he still carries things with him. And so I have him go, let's see, he's working in a factory that produces glass Christmas ornaments. And he's a talented artist. So he is very good at what he does, and he has made the factory famous. They get lots of contracts because of his work, but he has to downplay things initially, especially during the Cultural Revolution, which was 66 to 76. Mm-hmm. And that was a bitter and cruel time for many Christians. But then after that, they began to look to the West. And even though they had, Mao had said Christmas was a decadent Western holiday, and they had been trying to get rid of anything from the West. When he died, there was a change in the atmosphere, and they began to think, well, this is business. We can make things for them. Yeah. So they ramped up the manufacturing, and so my character is there for another 30 years, and then the story opens when he's an old man, and he can't do the painting anymore, but he loves to be with the other artist in the factory, and he tells them what Christmas is about, and he downplays it a bit. Because he's always afraid of repercussions. Yeah. He's not the bravest man, but then he's simple and quiet, and he has lost his family, he has lost his siblings, he has lost his wife and his child, and he has no one. He has no legacy but his own artwork, and so he does try to explain his artwork to the artists, and sometimes they enjoy it a lot, and then they begin to be confused, which you can imagine when he talks to them about the baby that Christians believe the baby Jesus was God. Okay, they kind of like that. The manger scene is very charming, and they can do a lot with that. But when they begin to hear that this God died a dishonorable death, they don't get it. Yeah. He loses them, but at least he's made them have a sense of who baby Jesus is. Yeah. So that makes him happy.
that shines through. That shines through.
I'm sorry.
That shines through in the book. That sense.
It's not a story with narrative heft, as they say. It's just an unfolding of his last days when he is able to tap into some of his deep memories and talk to a dear friend about it. And then he gets the courage to commit to going to midnight mass. And at that point, everything seems to be kosher. And actually, this is, that's the way it's been with the Chinese Catholics over the past several years. Sometimes it's okay in some areas to practice your faith, go to confession, go to mass. Right now, I think it's a little tougher.
Yeah. You told that lovely story about this Christmas ornament that you gifted to your daughter, and seeing the inside of it, obviously hand painted by an artisan, and knowing that it came from that country. But it's a long way from there to producing a book like this. So because ideas come and ideas go, but what compelled you to create this book?
Well, okay. My sisters, I have many sisters. I have 8 sisters. So it doesn't matter who it was. It's like this cosmic sister blob. And we're rather realistic. And our father was an artist. His name was Jian. So that's why I took the name Jian. But things do not look happy in the world. And even though my sisters are among the happiest people I know, we will often say things like, "This is apocalyptic. I think it's the end of the world." Someone will say that. And my sister said it to me, "I think it's the end of the world." And I said, "Yeah, promises, promises," because my thought is, what about China? What about India? Don't they get a crack at Christianity? And even though, there are millions of Christians over there, I still think that as a culture or as a people, maybe I'm second guessing God and God's plan, but I just think that's part of the intention of the incarnation is to redeem all people and to bring the message to all people. So I like to think about those things, and I think about China, and I think, well, how will they know? How are they going to become Christian? There has been a lot of successful Christian Protestant evangelizing. It's a little easier for them. It comes also, when I hear their messages, it's very fervent, great love of Christ. But for a lot of them, it's associated with self-empowerment. And
Yeah.
Catholics don't have that.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you want to follow Christ? Well, you might die. And then if you're martyred, that's really good.
Yeah.
And that's not a great pitch
Yeah.
for a lot of people. But if you say, if you organize your life, God will reward you. He wants you to be successful in life. Well, but I don't, if that message is going over there, and if some people are grabbing onto that, it's a step.
Yeah.
It means there's something outside yourself. And I think for a lot of people, eventually the prosperity gospel doesn't get them anywhere. They're still sad.
Yeah.
So, the whole, the church's magnificent sacramental system is there, all that richness.
Yeah.
And, God will have different ways of preparing hearts and minds over there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just a curiosity I have and I played with to think about how someone might come along in the faith.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Your book and this story is about Christian persecution in many ways, but it's also about perseverance. And I just wanted to ask you how did your love of Jesus influence this story?
Well, I'm quite a senior in the faith. I've been around for a long time. I've seen a lot of sadness. Like my character, we lost a child, and he was just 8.
Oh.
And you're so grateful for the gift of that child. And so my Jian didn't have bitterness. Of course, I didn't elaborate on that. That was just a half a sentence. A half a sentence that, he lost his child in the earthquake. But he still had a quiet sense of peacefulness and I would say hope. And that's what sustains you. It is, to me, it's a book on hope because I think that God implants in every heart an aspiration for happiness. And, Aristotle talks about that. The final end of man is happiness. And so it's not revelation that had to tell us that, though different cultures have a different way of expressing it and some not so well. But I do think in every heart, there is an aspiration for happiness, almost an expectation. in spite of how horrible life can be. So when you have the message of Christ, that taps into your normal aspiration. Oh, I can become a child of God. I can go to heaven. I can have a good life. Not a life of success necessarily, but I can take joy and goodness. And that's liberating for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's finally where I can be happy. So, thank God my husband and I were seasoned in the faith, and we were in our 40s when our second child, we have 4. He had leukemia, and it wasn't the typical childhood leukemia. It was, well, the doctor said, well, it's very rare in children. And I said, well, that's not working for me. So he was a valiant child. He was adorable, loving. We thank God for him every day. He was the first child on a study drug. That's a long story of perseverance on my husband's part, because the FDA was against us, the doctors were against us, the drug company was against us. It was a study drug for an adult disease and an adult study, but our son had the disease, and it was doing miracles for other people.
Wow.
So anyway, we persevered. We got the drug. It was too late for him. It gave him a couple of years of a very good life. And I have friends now whose children got this disease, and their one is in Harvard Law School.
Wow.
Because she took the drug, she was fine. But had our son not been the pioneer for that,
wow,
she might have lived, but she would have had to go through a stem cell transplant and all that. So we do have that sadness, at the heart of our lives. And it affected my other children, but not badly.
Yeah.
Sadness is not badness. And one of the other son, who was just so close to my son, Jian, and they were inseparable. And he lost his best friend when he was age 6. And they always thought there's only one person who can fill that hole. Now my son is at St. Michael's Abbey in California with the Norbertines.
Wow.
So I think all those,
we just never know God's plan and his graces and how things unfold, and the stories always ends up perfect, and we have no idea how it got there because of how, in some way.
Don't tell me it's perfect at certain points.
Not at every point. Not at every point, but there is a perfection to the whole thing. Often, in the moment, we don't always see it. There was a beautiful thing as you were talking about Christ and within our hearts, and it just made me remember how I sort of feel like Christ hid our own souls and himself in our hearts, and it's kind of our work in our lifetime to find both there. Whenever anyone approaches a topic like Christmas, there's always a component of nostalgia that you have to sort of deal with. But your book, I think through grace, gives a sense of nostalgia without being nostalgic. And so were you kind of aware of this while you were writing the book? I mean, it brought for me these feelings of nostalgia, but it's not nostalgic.
I know people always criticize books or stories, especially for children, for being so sentimental and this and that. I don't want to be. I want to be realistic, but then I want to draw the beauty out of it. And I don't think of nostalgia as a dirty word either. In fact, my father-in-law started the nostalgia book club back in the 90s.
Yeah, fantastic.
So there is something about our past. We're all nostalgic about, most of us have some period of our time in the past that we're nostalgic about. And I think it's because it's when it's good, a good nostalgia, the Holy Spirit helps us to sift through the memory, and the chaff sifts away and we see something beautiful. And that's the memory we cherish. And if somebody said, yeah, but don't you remember Dad was arguing with Aunt Jackie and it was so embarrassing on that Christmas day and there was this and that. And you think, yeah, I remember that part, but I still love that day. We can't make sense of it to other people necessarily, and that's okay. But I do think I think it's the Holy Spirit, that winged dove. I think of Brideshead Revisited. My theme is memory, and the winged dove soared about me one day in wartime. And I think the winged dove is the Holy Spirit, and he is associated with memory. And so, as he did at Pentecost with the apostles, he helped them to sift out a lot of the stuff that they had seen and felt, so that they could recognize what was really important. And so for my character, Jian, as an old man, he's not thinking of all the suffering any longer. It's a part of his life. He hasn't it's who he is. You can't come to him and say, well, he would have been a good man except for all the suffering he went through. But that's part of who he is. And so he carries his wounds with him. But that's all right with him at the time when he's very near death.
Yeah.
And God will reveal to him, he believes, the whole picture.
Yeah.
And, he's not worried about it.
Tremendous amount of faith. And also, the theme of attachment comes up as well, detachment, persevering, so many parallels, without spoiling it for anyone, because I really just encourage anyone to just pick up this beautiful book, which is also beautifully illustrated. It's got a beautiful color palette and a watercolor and sketched imagery, which is divine. It's just really beautiful. It's so thoughtful. And but I want to go. Yeah.
Well, the artist is Gwyneth Thompson Briggs, and any of your listeners can go to her website. So I will say her name is a mouthful. Gwyneth with a Y, Thompson Briggs, 2 G's, and you'll find her.
Yeah.
And she's a classically trained artist. She's a friend, and I told her I had this story, and I said it's kind of an odd story. It would be hard to pitch without a few pictures. So she sent me the picture of Jian in his very meditative manner, painting, and I thought, that's it.
Yeah.
So he was just a simple man who seemed to be in love with his work. And I thought that was perfect.
It's certainly a theme I can relate to, because I've certainly seen a lot of artisans, and my life as a filmmaker, filmed them and been around them since I've lived in this country. And there's a reverence, and I can't even name how many times I've been in these workshops, and there's always a crucifix, There's always a nod to. I just wanted to ask you about because we don't really know about Chinese Christianity, and I'd like you to share what you learned about Chinese Christians while creating this work.
Well, it's hard. It's hard to learn very much about them because with the Catholic Church, you have the Catholic the Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association, and that was approved. But for the longest time, the other Catholics said, no, they're in line. They're just following what the communists say, and they're not in line with the church. To be in line with the church, you have to you have to consider the Pope as more than just a spiritual head. The communists were saying, okay, the Pope he's a spiritual head, but he cannot tell you what to do. So it's a big problem right now.
Yeah.
And I guess you must understand, you must know, I'm sure you know that the Vatican has an arrangement that was made with Beijing, and that was in 2018. And it's a new deal for the Catholic Church, but nobody gets to see the terms of the deal. They were going to, have a continue, look at it, see it progress for 2 years, then renew it, and then another 2 years. So we're for the second time, they've renewed it in 2022. Cardinal Zen says that it's a sellout of your deeply convicted Catholics who will risk persecution going to an underground church. So you've got the above ground church and the underground church. Yeah. The Vatican has given some approval to the above ground bishops.
Yeah, which they.
So it's a state of persecution, and it's similar to what went on, I think, in the Soviet Union. Sometimes you had operative parishes, sometimes you did not. Sometimes there was persecution. So, many of the seminaries and the parishes would be. You would have spies,
Yeah.
So it's amazing that there are people who call themselves Christian at all. I feel so grateful to their witness. And so that's another reason, I was kind of happy that this book came together, because we have to pay tribute to these heroic people. I think they're hungry. And, in this country, we're pretty satisfied with ourselves, and we don't have the same hunger for the faith that they do. Yeah. And so they're ready. That's another thing. I just think they're ready. But I think of that. I think New York City's ready too. So
yeah.
Even Rome is ready to hear the faith.
Yeah. No, as you were speaking there, I was just I was thinking about the grace that we have still to visit the Blessed Sacrament on a daily basis, attend a Mass on a daily basis in many places in the world, attend a Sunday Mass, which really isn't optional for a Catholic. It's really not an option, a Sunday Mass. Right. It's not a Sunday Mass or something else. So, that is available to us. And as I'm reading through your book, I just realized the number of years your main character goes through without even having that grace of being able to participate in a Mass. And you illustrate that so nicely when that is able to happen again for him in his life, because you track a lifetime really of this story. And I also, There's a shout out to French Canadian missionaries, missionary priests in the book.
I did
as well.
have to do that.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
So,
but there is, as we're speaking, there is still that mission, and it takes people, very brave people, and in our faith, before this time, there were people that did go into those situations, very often to their own end, and in very perilous situations, but that was the level of their faith and their belief.
I came across an old letter that I had from a Jesuit missionary. His name was Father Hoole, which sounds, you're thinking Chinese, but he was Irish, American. And it was a personal letter, and then included was a report on the Jesuit outreach to China and territories. And they had 500 members out there. This was in 1981. And he says members, so I'm thinking it doesn't just include priests. Mm-hmm. But most of them at that time were in mainland China and in Vietnam, were either in camps or nearly under house arrest.
Wow.
They were very restricted. So something has to happen. There has to be a break. I can understand why the Chinese are correct in thinking of Christianity as being a threat to their power. Because it is about another power.
Yeah.
And it's something they can't control.
How can your story in this little book help enlighten Christians to what they're called to do through the commandments and to love our neighbor?
First of all, you just live your life without worrying about what people will think. If you're wearing a cross, if you have a scapular, if you have a little replica of the baby Jesus in your pocket because it gives you comfort, let other people know that you do and have those things. And let them ask questions. Very often people don't ask questions, I find. I find people really don't want to touch Christianity. But still, I think it works something in their heart, and they begin to wonder, what's going on? I used to wonder about my neighbors when we went through all these sad things with our son for 3.5 years, and then he died. What do they think about how we handled things? And, I had people saying to me, "Oh, are you going into therapy?" And I, for some people that would be right, but it's not a necessity. I mean, life is sad, and I was sad. I didn't have depression. I had sadness, and let me have my sadness, please. Well, maybe that's why they don't talk to me, because that's the kind of response I make. I can be grieved, can't I?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my personality.
I think there's more. I think you're touching on something very important, which is the preparedness our faith gives one for life. The life preparedness, because these stories are with us when we're practicing our faith. They're part of us, and when there's a reference point when something happens in our lives, whatever happens, a tragedy, a joy, there's a reference point that we can always turn toward. And I'm sure you had many in those 3 years.
Yes.
And I'm sure there were days when a word of scripture or your guardian angel or something called to you to put that in its context. And this is the strength of the faith that you're talking about. And this is the strength of the faith in your main character, who perseveres and doesn't let go of what he believes.
I have a friend who also lost her child, and she wrote a book, a very meditative book on the year following his death. And it was a lovely book. But she sent it around to publishers, and they said, well, there's just not enough narrative heft to this book. And so I've always thought about that. Most of us wouldn't make a good film because, if I said, I finally gave up my drug addiction after my son, died, then somebody might be interested in that story. But if I just say, the faith sustained me, that's not so interesting. I mean, it is to you and me, but and how does that happen? Well, you have to know, that's exploring the faith. But so my character, his own personal things are happening around him, and they're terrible. But his life is really very simple, and it's not the kind of life that makes for a good movie, unless you want something very quiet. It would be difficult.
Yeah. Well, as a filmmaker, I saw and felt a lot of the imagery that does come through in the words of this book. And I want to encourage everyone to pick this book up. And I also want to ask you, what age group do you feel this book is for?
It's a difficult question because it depends on the maturity of the child. These, first of all, you have to understand China's one-child policy, and then there was the two-child policy, and now there's the three-child policy, and those are things that might be too difficult for a little child to accept, to understand, but it's also something you could breeze over. So if they're 11 years old, some things you would and should explain to them. You should, a parent should explain the communist revolution, just in a few sentences. And they should explain the Cultural Revolution, which was terrible. And I kept thinking about it during cancel culture, during COVID. Just, no, you cannot say these things. You're not a scientist. You can't have a thought.
Yeah.
So I think an 11-year-old could pick it up and get something out of it and enjoy it. But I think it's better for a parent to read with a child. So, but it's not for little children.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, that's what I was
imagining. You can look at the pictures.
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, I want to thank you for being so open, so forthcoming, so raw and real with what's happened in your life and how that's affected your art, and for bringing it forward in this way. But I just want to ask you, just as we close out here, why this book is so relevant at this moment? Why do you feel it's so relevant right now?
Well, there are a lot of people who weigh in on Christmas and what it's about. And so it's in a way, it's addressing many, many, many different ideas of what Christmas is. And of course, at the heart is baby Jesus and the love this man has for baby Jesus and how faith in him sustained him. And how approachable the Christ child is. And Christ crucified, Christ risen is less approachable. But it's easy to begin our love at the foot of the manger. And also, there are a lot of young people, beautiful young people, who don't like all the jazzy stuff that goes on at Christmas and all this, it should be more spiritual. And I'm thinking, don't take away all my glitzy things. I like it. It's a statement. It can be over the top. It can be in bad taste. I had neighbors in Florida who would put up a blown up Frosty on their lawn, roasting in the Naples sunshine in December. But if that makes them happy, if that gives them a little joy of their youth, reminds them of which is that phrase from Mass, then let's go with it. Yeah. We're celebrating the incarnation, and it's a heavenly child's birthday. And of course he's going to have why not have a lot of stuff? But it would be ugly to us if we didn't have at the heart of it, God becoming man.
Yeah.
The promise of the ages. So I'm so grateful that the church has always celebrated it. And there's a quote way back from Leo, Pope Leo, how we cannot be sad on this day. And then Saint Francis giving us the creche, and the Germans giving us the Christmas tree, and Dickens giving us some fun ideas. So It goes on and on. I'm always looking for beautiful and fresh celebrations and insights myself.
Well, I wish you a very early Merry Christmas as we approach the Advent season.
Thank you, David.
The book is Christmas Blossoms, and I've been speaking to its author, Priscilla Smith McCaffrey. Priscilla, thank you so much for taking the time with me today.
Thank you, David.
You have been listening to The Way is Love on the Focusing Way podcast. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Or go to thefocusingway.com and subscribe for bonus content and extras.